If you just started following Japanese baseball this year, you might be confused by the presence of one team that played in this year's Japan series, the Orix Buffaloes. Those of you who know Ichiro Suzuki might also know that before he played in North America, he was a member of the Orix Blue Wave. Okay, neat, so they're the same team, you're thinking. But if you also know who Hideo Nomo is, you might know that when he played in Japan, he played for a team called the Orix-Kintetsu Buffaloes. So are the Blue Wave the Buffaloes? Or are the Buffaloes the Buffaloes? The answer, in short, is yes. During the 2004 season, these two teams started a colossal mess that nearly killed Japanese baseball as we know it today. This is the story of the merger. First, let's do a quick delve into some history. Mergers were actually fairly common in NPB's early days. 3 other NPB teams can trace their roots back to a merger. Following NPB's inaugural season in 1950, the Fukuoka Nishi-Nippon Pirates were forced to merge with the Fukuoka Nishi-Tetsu Clippers after a conflict of interest accusation was leveled against the Pirates' owners, Nishi-Nippon Shimbun. They, along with Hokkaido Shimbun, had partnered with Chunichi Shimbun to form the 3-paper block. Since Chunichi also had a team in NPB, the Dragons, and the Dragons were the older and more powerful of the two clubs, the Pirates were the odd team out. The merger with the Clippers produced the Fukuoka Nishi-Tetsu Lions, and they still exist to this day as the Saitama Seibu Lions. In 1952, the Shochiku Robins were about to be jettisoned from NPB after finishing last in the 1952 season, as Central League wanted to go down to an even 6 teams. So, they merged with the Taiyo Whales, forming the second edition of the Taiyo Robins. Not to be confused with the first edition of the Taiyo Robins, which were named after a different Taiyo. Taiyo would later buy out Shochiku, bring back the Whales name, and move the team to Kanagawa, where they still play to this day as the Yokohama DNA Baystars. And finally, in 1956, the Tombo Unions merged with the Daiei Stars to create the Daiei Unions. After struggling along for one more year, Daiei struck up a deal with Mainichi to merge the team with the Mainichi Orions to create the Daimai Orions, who still exist to this day as the Chiba Lotte Marines. In the intervening years between the Daimai merger and the one we're going to talk about, threats of a merger had only reared their head once, when real estate company Nitaku Home, who'd bought the Flyers off of Toei, offered them up to the pseudo-homeless Lotte Orions. Pacific League would step in, kick Nitaku Home to the curb, and force them to sell the Flyers to Nippon Ham, who renamed them the Fighters. Other than that incident, NPB remained largely stable. Sure, some teams moved, but nothing really rocked the boat too much. Then along came Orix. Orix is an Osaka-based financial services company with its hands in a lot of pies. By the late 80s, they were one of the most successful financial conglomerates, not just in Japan, but in the world. Around the same time, Hankyu Electric Railway Company was being pressured by their board to sell their team, the Hankyu Braves. The Braves were a Pacific League institution, being the lone founding franchise to break away and join Pacific League when JPBL was restructured into NPB in 1950. They had won 10 Pacific League pennants, 3 Japan Series titles, and were seen as one of the pillars of both Pacific League and Japanese baseball as a whole. Naturally, a team like that coming onto the market would make anyone jump, and Orix took the bait and bought them. And they would make themselves very unpopular very quickly. In short, Hankyu had not been very business-like in their approach to running the Braves. First, since Hankyu owned the stadium and the transit lines around it, they elected to make most of their money from those transit lines as well as concessions and merch sales. This led to them giving out free tickets like candy, which kept their attendance very healthy. In the wake of the Black Mist scandal, this left them as the only Pacific League team that could reliably pack their stadium. It helped that A, they were good, and B, they were the lone Pacific League club not wrapped up in the whole thing, but I digress. This system had made them a boatload of fans, and considering that they shared a market with the Hanshin Tigers, the second most popular team in NPB, that was no small feat. Orix would immediately put a stop to this, outright. While on the surface this seems like a sound business decision, especially now that they didn't own the transit lines or the stadium, it immediately turned a lot of fans off. The cheap and occasionally free tickets were a key part of the Braves' appeal. People liked that they could go to an NPB game for virtually nothing, as opposed to a more expensive Hanshin Tigers game. It showed the Braves' largely working-class fan base that Orix didn't care about them, only the bottom line. Second, they changed the name. The Braves' name had existed since the nickname mandate came in 1946. It had been the name that carried them through their years of dominance, and it didn't even have a problematic past, as most of the Braves' logos showed a Roman legionnaire, rather than any kind of Native American iconography. And then there's this, bird. To top it off, the two most recent times a team had changed hands, the new owners had respected the nickname's history and kept it. When Seibu bought the Fukuoka Crown Lighter Lions and moved them to Saitama, the Lions name stayed. When Daiei bought the Nankai Hawks and moved them to Fukuoka, the Hawks name stayed. They understood that maintaining at least some connection to the teams of old was necessary in order to keep a coherent team fiction going. Daiei may have ditched the iconic green Nankai Hawks look to adopt these, things, but at least they were still called the Hawks. Orix didn't care. They wanted a new name to signify this new era, and they put out a poll to fans to see what they would like the team to be called. The answer was, overwhelmingly, Braves. Now, if you're Orix, you could do one of two things. A, take the damn hint, or B, put out another poll where you specifically say that Braves isn't allowed, and piss off the fans even more. Take a wild guess as to what they did. Even then, Orix made it worse. The name that won the fan poll was Thunder. It was a fairly imposing name, if a bit generic, but it fit the new color scheme very well. But nah, choosing the winning name would only foster a fan connection with the team, and it was damn clear that Orix didn't want that, so instead they chose Blue Wave, a name that baffled fans. To roughly quote a member of the Braves' Owendon, it felt like the outcome of the race was decided before the gun even went off. The name was chosen to represent the patterns of the Hyogo prefectural flag, something that would have made more sense if not for the third thing they did: move the team. In what was seen as a cowardly move to kowtow to the Hanshin Tigers and screw the team's old owners, they moved out of Hankyu Stadium in Nishinomiya to Green Stadium in Kobe proper. So the Blue Wave were playing in Green Stadium in the Green Hills of a city whose official color is green. Yes, it was still in Hyogo, so the name technically still made sense, but you don't build an identity on a technicality. They also hired a new manager, Shozo Doi, replacing longtime skipper Toshiharu Ueda, who'd led them to 7 of their 10 pennants and all 3 of their titles. And this made a very important person very upset. Greg Boomer Wells had been one of the faces of the Hankyu Braves throughout the 80s. Unusually for a foreign player, he'd become a key piece of his team's identity. He was immensely popular with Braves fans and was often seen walking out of Hankyu Stadium with his daughter perched high up on his shoulders. Provided you didn't bean him, Boomer was also a massive teddy bear, never saying no to an autograph or a picture, something that made him even more popular with fans. Even noted hard-ass manager Ueda had taken a liking to him, and the two were often seen dining together after games. Boomer had even taken several hometown discounts with the Braves because he felt indebted to Hankyu, the team that had taken a chance on him and the team that had made him a star. And that only made Hankyu fans love him even more. He wasn't just some foreign helper, he was one of the best players they'd ever had. And he was pissed. He didn't like the new stadium, he didn't like the new colors, and he hated the new name. He even conspired with some clubbies to take the field in an Orix Braves jersey and wear it until someone noticed during the first game under the Blue Wave name. He hated that Orix had slashed he and his teammates' meal stipends and wouldn't give them transit passes to get to games. And most of all, he hated Doi. Under Ueda, Wells had built himself into a respected member of the clubhouse. He could talk to coaches man to man and they'd listen to him. When he spoke, people listened. Doi did not listen. Doi didn't give a shit if Boomer was an 8-year NPB veteran who'd won a triple crown and 2 gold gloves. Doi saw Boomer as just another foreign player who should shut the fuck up and do as he was told. So, in 1991, Boomer requested a trade. After he was dealt to the Lily Dai Hawks, he talked to the press back in Kansai. He made it clear that he still unconditionally loved Braves fans who'd followed him throughout his time in Nishinomiya, and the fact that he'd requested the trade was the fault of both Orix and Doi. The Braves' Owendon would taunt Doi with chants of Tokyo ni modoru or go back to Tokyo every time he stepped on the field from then until he was fired at the end of the 1993 season. So, let's take a brief look back at Orix's first 3 years of ownership. Cut a fan favorite program in favor of the bottom line? Check. Torpedo your team's identity? Check. Move out of an iconic stadium? Check. Fire the man responsible for most of your success? Check. Piss off one of the most popular players you've ever had? Check. In a shocking failure of karma to do its job, some kid named Ichiro Suzuki swept in and saved the day by being, the best player of the 90s and leading them to 2 pennants and a Japan Series title in 1996. And the fact that they got him was sheer luck, too. It took one of their top scouts getting on his hands and knees to convince the GM to take Ichiro in the 4th round. Solid work there. Thanks to the great Ichiro-led teams in the 90s, plus Orix's cost-saving measures and money-managing skills, the Blue Wave actually came out of the 90s in much better shape than many other teams. Because by the early 2000s, Pacific League was teetering on the edge. Now, if you know anything about Japanese baseball, know this. The 2 leagues have a bit of a chasm between them. Unlike the American League and the National League in Major League Baseball, who both have their smattering of legendary teams, there has always been a serious gap in popularity between the Central and Pacific League. If you ask most people on the street, or on the baseball subreddit so you don't look like a weirdo, to name a Japanese team, you'll get Tokyo Giants, Hanshin Tigers, maybe even the Chunichi Dragons. All 3 have shown up in our pop culture in some way or another in the last 30 years, and all 3 are Central League teams. And before anyone goes, what about the Blue Wave? Name me a Japanese Blue Wave player outside of Ichiro or So Taguchi. 99% of you failed that question. It's only in recent years, with their progressive social media strategy, as well as branching out into English and Chinese markets, that Pacific League has become anywhere near as popular as Central League. Naturally, Pacific League teams were kind of money pits. Now, all were owned by big conglomerates, but still, there's only so much a company can lose before they cut bait. By 2003, things were in dire straits. Daiei, the supermarket chain that had moved the Hawks to Fukuoka, was teetering on the edge of bankruptcy. Seibu, the Lions owners and Japan's richest conglomerate, were being investigated for some financial shadiness. Nippon Ham had been upset about sharing the market with not 1 but 2 vastly more popular Central League clubs, so they struck up a deal to move to the Sapporo Dome for the 2004 season, rebranding themselves as the Hokkaido Nippon Ham Fighters. And Kintetsu was 1.3 trillion yen in debt. Kintetsu had been involved in Japanese pro baseball since the early 1940s, when they co-owned the team that eventually became the Hawks. After Nankai bought them out in 1947, they started their own team, the Kintetsu Pearls, and joined Pacific League when JPBL became NPB in 1950. They would be renamed the Buffaloes in 1959 and had a long and painful history of being on the outside looking in, but I've already briefly covered most of that. Point was, they were floundering, and they needed to part with some of their assets if they wanted to stay afloat. They sold the Hokusei Railway line to Sangai Railway Company, they sold their sightseeing bus company to Crystal Group, now known as Rida Holdings, and they closed their hotel and department store. The fire sale also hit the baseball team too, as they failed to offer club legend Tuffy Rhodes the multi-year deal he wanted, so he signed with the Yomiuri Giants at the start of the 2004 season. And around the same time, they announced that they'd be selling the naming rights of the Kintetsu Buffaloes to the highest bidder. Orix just happened to notice their biggest rival's struggles and slid into their DMs. By June 13, 2004, residents of Osaka woke up to front-page news from Nikkei Shimbun. Merger talks were officially in the works. Now, from here on out, things get really complicated, so I'm going to try and condense it into a quick timeline of events. That same day, representatives of both clubs held a press conference, and Kintetsu chairman Masanori Yamaguchi would utter some very infamous words. The team is a management resource with no prospect of recovery, which is business bullshitese for the merger is happening whether you like it or not. June 17th, representatives from all Pacific League clubs, as well as the Pacific League Commissioner, met to discuss the merger. After Orix and Kintetsu's opening statements explaining themselves, the representatives from the other 4 teams gave them de facto support, basically agreeing to vote in favor of the move when it reached the NPB Board of Directors later that month. The usually quiet Professional Baseball Players Association, who I will refer to henceforth as the NPBPA, released a statement the next day expressing their disdain with the whole situation, stating that the owners weren't doing enough to reverse the declining financial situation, and they also openly questioned if Kintetsu had searched for a buyer before settling on the merger. On June 21st, the NPB Board of Directors met and voted unanimously to approve the start of merger talks. Kintetsu, Orix, and Pacific League retreated to hammer out the details. On July 1st, Pacific League revealed the basic tenets of the merger. Ownership will be split 80-20 in favor of Orix. The team will play their home games at both the Osaka Dome and Kobe Sports Park, and will have exclusive rights to those stadiums, and 28 players will be protected from the subsequent dispersal draft. Central League, however, rejected the latter 2 proposals. Hanshin wanted access to the Osaka Dome so they could play home games during the Summer Koshin tournament, and all the teams protested that the new merged team should not be allowed to protect more than a complete roster of players. Both of these issues would be sorted out by July 5th. At the same time, Lotte chairman Dongbin Shin says that he wanted a second merger to take place, arguing that 5 Pacific League clubs would cause more financial bleeding. He also advocated for NPB to operate in a one-league system like the KBO. This was because Lotte, tired of trying to compete in the crowded Greater Tokyo area, wanted to buy the Fukuoka Daiei Hawks and merge the 2. The merger is also enthusiastically backed by Yomiuri Giants chairman Tsuneo Watanabe. On July 10th, NPBPA put its foot down. Before the first game of the All-Star Series, they put out a public statement condemning the merger. And they set out a list of demands. 1. They wanted NPB to freeze the merger for at least a year, if not call it off altogether. 2. They wanted a luxury tax to help financially support poorer teams. 3. They wanted the entire draft to be run off the waiver system, not just the first couple rounds. 4. They wanted to introduce unrestricted free agency. 5. They wanted to reduce the 3 billion yen transfer fee for teams, or the 6 billion yen entry fee for new teams. And 6. They wanted to keep the 2-league system, but merge the TV rights into one governing body like in MLB. They finished their statement by saying that if either merger were to go through without any hope of a new team joining to maintain the balance, they would strike. That same day, the fans made their opinions known. It's customary for fans at the All-Star Game to mingle and cheer with one another, but this year, thanks to Watanabe's previous comments, Giants fans were excluded from the All-NPB cheering squad, and Giants players were booed relentlessly every time they stepped on the field, save for longtime Buffaloes legend Tuffy Rhodes. Every All-Star would also wear a Misanga bracelet woven from the colors of all 12 teams, representing their opposition to both the merger and the one-league structure. On July 16th, Kintetsu Buffaloes players launched a petition to block the merger and staged a walkout with Buffaloes fans in front of Osaka Dome. And lest you think this was just the guys whose jobs would be threatened by the merger, the men leading them were the Buffaloes' 2 best players, Norihiro Nakamura and Hisashi Iwakuma. The Chunichi Dragons would be the second team to walk out in support of the petition on the 23rd, and even the Giants players would join them on the 29th. By August 5th, players from all 12 NPB clubs would be out soliciting signatures, even the Orix Blue Wave. On August 10th, the basics of the merger are agreed to by both Orix and Kintetsu, and they are legally ratified. However, this is not publicized by either group due to the name and home stadium not being decided yet. On August 12th, the NPBPA votes to establish their right to strike. The vote passes 648 to 7. On August 27th, the NPBPA launched a lawsuit to block the merger. This lawsuit was immediately thrown out on September 3rd because the merger had already been agreed to by both the league and the teams involved. An immediate appeal was also thrown out on the 8th, but the court did say that the NPBPA did have a right to collective bargaining, and any attempt by the league to circumvent NPBPA's right to strike would be illegal. At the same time, Giants chairman Tsuneya Watanabe revealed that, should a second merger happen in Pacific League, he would transfer the Yomiuri Giants to Pacific League to maintain the balance. The other 5 Central League owners immediately voiced their displeasure with the move, and the second merger immediately lost all Central League support. That same day, the Hiroshima Carp abstained from the final vote on the merger. It would still pass unanimously, however. It was announced that the new name would be the Orix Buffaloes, and the Kintetsu Buffaloes would be rendered defunct. Also on the 8th, the proposed merger between the Marines and Hawks is shut down, both by the Central League owners and by Daiei themselves, who announced that they will be selling the team to a third party. The players and owners opened negotiations on September 10th. They maintained that the merger is still happening whether the players like it or not, but they do hammer out a provisional agreement. 1. If a satisfactory schedule cannot be established, the merger will be frozen for a year. 2. NPB will reduce the deposit for new teams in order to entice a new team in. 3. The two-league structure will remain, and no future mergers will be allowed. 4. The Committee for Draft Reform will be established to look into the players' demands surrounding the draft. And 5. If no permanent agreement can be reached by 5 p.m. on September 17th, the players would strike. By this time, both Rakuten and Livdor had put forth bids to start a new team and fill out the league, and the players used this as their main leverage. If NPB were to approve just one of those bids, they could avoid the strike altogether. But NPB continued to drag their feet, stating that it needed more time to review the applications, even though they had been public knowledge since mid-August. Unsurprisingly, negotiations went nowhere. And on the night of the 17th, Players Union rep Atsuya Furuta, longtime catcher for the Tokyo Swallows, made an appearance on the evening news of every popular TV station, during which he announced that the players were going on strike, and gave the public a detailed explanation as to why. Furuta's appearances did a lot to swing public opinion into the players' camp, and it remained strong when the players walked out on September 18th. The strike only lasted for 2 days, but it freaked the owners out enough that they went straight back to the negotiating table. By the 23rd, a new agreement had been reached. In it, NPB promised to be proactive in finding a 12th team, and to have the process be made as transparent as possible so nobody would be left in the dark about backdoor dealings, and also so the players couldn't whine if a new team couldn't be found. It was also announced that should a new team be founded, it would have to be based out of Miyagi Baseball Stadium in Sendai, which had last hosted an NPB team in 1977. This was to fulfill NPB's ambitions of expanding into northern Japan, as well as ensuring that the new team would not have to compete with anyone else. Immediately, all eyes turned to Rakuten and Livdor. So, just who were these two companies vying to set up NPB's 12th team? Well, let's start with Livdor. Takafumi Hori started Livedoor, originally called On the Edge Limited, in 1996 when he was only 24 years old. What did they do? Everything. They were a product of the dot-com boom of the late 90s. Their biggest market was in advertising as well as being a small ISP. They also distributed their own Linux-based operating system. In reality, Livedoor was a personal vehicle for Hori's ambitions, and non-internet conscious stock traders had given him the money to make it happen. Hori was very outspoken about wanting to buy the Buffaloes and prevent the merger, remaining a vocal proponent of the move up until the merger was announced. And when the merger was announced, he immediately put forth a proposal to start a new team. He established a new shell company, Livedoor Baseball, that would handle the day-to-day operations of the team, and announced that should he win the bid, the manager of the new team would be 1995 Central League MVP Tom O'Malley. The other company in the running was Rakuten. Rakuten is basically Japanese Amazon mixed with eBay. Founded in 1997, they had also seen a rapid growth during the dot-com boom, but unlike Livedoor, they provided a more concrete service that more people used every day. They had also started acquiring several companies they felt would help their service, such as search engines InfoSeek and BizSeek, which they integrated into their company. They also ran a travel agency, an advertising service, a blogging service, and a securities company. They even had their own bank card. You name it, they did it. When they announced their intentions to form the team, they said that their GM would be longtime baseball critic Marty Kernhardt, and their manager would be former outfielder Yasushi Tao. On October 5th, the first public examination committee was screened live on TV. Both sides were asked about their plans for the stadium, which at the time seated only 23,000 people. Rakuten stated that they would start with the 23,000 people for 2005 and have the renovations completed by the 2006 season, allocating 3.2 billion yen for the project. Livedoor said that they could finish the renovations in the middle of the 2005 season, and they would only need 2.5 billion yen to do it. The second public examination committee would be on October 14th. This, however, was more so targeting the company's morals. It mainly focused on what the companies were doing to stop kids from accessing the porn sites that both companies hosted through their web hosting service. You know, classic early 2000s moral outrage stuff. However, what Livedoor said would contribute to their undoing. They said they couldn't control who drives on their streets and visits their plazas, to use the metaphor, but Rakuten went, you can, and here's how we do it. Eventually, on November 2nd, NPB accepted Rakuten's bid, wisely seeing the stable company that actually provided a tangible service as the safer option. Shocker. Hori would throw a fit and trademark the name that Rakuten wanted to use for their new team, the Golden Eagles, before Rakuten could get a hold of it, which led to a quick legal battle where Rakuten just paid him to go away. Even better, Hori would go to prison in 2006 for financial shadiness, and Livedoor went down with him. Really dodged a bullet there, boys. The team would go on to be known as the Tohoku Rakuten Golden Eagles, as they strove to represent the entirety of northern Honshu, and they would get the cast-offs from the merger. Much to Orix's dismay, several former Buffaloes that they had protected would refuse to play for them. Norihiro Nakamura bolted for the LA Dodgers, and Hisashi Iwakuma and Koichi Isobe both requested to be traded to the Eagles immediately, not wanting to play for the team that had stolen theirs. Buffalo's fans were also broken by the move, and they were even more enraged when Mitsutaka Goto took the field wearing the number 1. Kintetsu had retired the number in honor of their former ace Keiichi Suzuki. It only reinforced the fact that their team was gone. So a good amount of Buffalo's fans stopped watching them. They either followed their former stars to the Eagles, caved and became Hanshin Tigers fans like the rest of their family, or gave up on the sport altogether. Orix tried everything in the early years to bring those fans back in. They grabbed Kazuhiro Kiyohara in 2006, they brought back Nakamura and Rhodes, and they tried everything under the sun to appeal to the new fans, but a lot of it didn't work. It wouldn't be until nearly a decade after the merger that Orix would finally decide to create a new, concrete identity, changing the team's colors to black and gold, and revamping the branding to reflect it. Meanwhile, the Rakuten Eagles did this. That's right, the Eagles, who were a terrible team made up of scraps when they started in 2005, built a championship team in less than a decade. Meanwhile, the Buffaloes are still looking for their first since the merger, although they did make it all the way to the Japan Series in 2021. All in all, the merger reminds us that jumping to conclusions instead of thinking a problem through will only backfire in your face. Orix treated the whole thing like a game of shogi, not realizing that the pieces would not move the way they wanted them to. In the end, an unpopular owner tanked their popularity even more, a historic team was lost to the sands of time, and nothing really changed. Such is life. Before you go, I just want to say a quick thank you to everyone watching this. You make this possible, and I wouldn't be doing it without you. Sorry this one's a bit late. If you want an explanation, look at the timer. I didn't expect it to be this long, but hey, rabbit holes are rabbit holes, and you dive down them. So, thank you. Do the YouTube stuff to feed the algorithm, and if you're new here and you like what you see, subscribe, join the team, join the family, join the whatever YouTubers call their audience these days. You're too small to give a nickname to yet. Anyways, thank you. Have a good one. Buffaloes, buffaloes.